Good everybody, my name is Mike Marshall.
I'm Emily.
I'm Amelia Mullen.
And I'm Kirstyn Sanders. And we chose South Africa for our project. And it's also known as the Rainbow Nation, which was a coined nickname by Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu to describe the melting pot of people and cultures living in this country.
Our learning outcomes for this presentation are as follows. We're going to cover the different parts of cultures, including their health beliefs, syndromes, and the spiritual aspects, and the dietary considerations of the South African culture. And we're also at the end going to be including the Christian worldview and how it applies to their health care. And that is an outline of how our presentation is going to follow through. When you look at South Africa at a glance, there is a very wide diversity of people, but the majority of people are Africans, making up 80% of the population. There are various languages. Many of this culture are multilingual or bilingual. English is very popular, but among their African languages, they have a very wide diversity of different variations. Their primary religion is Christianity, but even though that's considered the major religion, there's still many African traditions held within their beliefs, and sometimes even combine the Christianity with their African roots. The African culture has a direct effect on health provision, as before they even go to the primary health practitioner, they go to what's called a traditional healer, and that makes up 60 to 80% of the population. So before they even go and consult a medical doctor, they're going to a traditional healer. The definition of traditional medicine is the sum total of all knowledge and practices, whether explicable or not, used in diagnosis, prevention, and elimination of physical, mental, or societal imbalance, and relying exclusively on practical experience and observation handed down from generation, whether verbally or in writing. Traditional medicine includes the cultural and religious aspects, as I included before, and it's considered a holistic approach, as it includes their belief system and herbs and other methods of treating individuals. To them, the disease is considered a supernatural phenomenon determined by higher powers. It's not just an ailment like we would see it in America. It goes further than that. It encompasses individuals physically, psychologically, spiritually, and socially. There's three main positions within traditional medicine. The Sangoma, which is considered the top individual, and they're considered the diviner. The Inyanga, which is the herbalist and the spiritual healer, and those all will be talked about further throughout the presentation. And throughout the rest of the presentation, we'll look at religion, family, and ancestry, and what resources they have available that all affect their health decisions.
Okay, so the South African culturally bound syndrome is Amafufunyana. It's basically a belief that they have that there is possession by evil spirits, which is caused by witchcraft. It's a serious disorder among the Zulu, specifically, and the Xhosa people, when traditional healers believe that the evil spirits have invaded their body through ants, an ant paste that they have ingested. Normally, they believe that it happens in secret, and the symptoms of this are that they hear different voices that are actually coming from their stomach. They're normally different voices than what they know of their own languages, and they're not kind voices. They're aggressive voices, and they're normally ordering people around. So it's something that's very similar to what we would call schizophrenia in our culture, and so it's believed that some people believe that it's just symptoms of a cultural form of schizophrenia, or the witchcraft portion of it. Another culturally bound syndrome that's still being researched if it qualifies is anorexia nervosa, and that's among the adolescent, mostly female population, and it's due to what we'll talk about in just a few minutes with their diet, and that they're just not healthy, and it's affected their obesity level in the country. Another point to make about Ama Fufunyana is that it has been used to explain the schizophrenic patients. To move on to the South African diet, some of the main food groups that are consumed among the rural dwellers is a higher intake of cereal and vegetables. The higher intake of cereals is going to go towards what we would call complex carbs, so breads, cookies, things that are just going to turn into sugar and eventually turn into fat in the body. Other higher intake food items are meats and dairy products. As shown by the urban dwellers, there's a very high intake of sugar in the form of candies and vegetable oils for cooking, like I said, dairy products, and then fruit and roots would qualify as potatoes or carrots, things that are grown from the ground, and then alcohol and other stimulants are very highly ingested as well. There is a lower form of vegetable intake with the urban dwellers. So some undesirable trends that were found in the culture is the poor intake of fruits and vegetables, the high intake and increasing intake of fats, the decrease in milk intake, the overall increase of energy intake that's not needed, the high increase of alcohol intake, and the low fiber intake. This affects this population by the 41% that has hypertension, which leads to a high percentage of ischemic heart disease, and the obesity obviously leading to type 2 diabetes mellitus, which 14% of the population has. Family influences on health decisions made by this culture. It's most of the households consist of parents, married or single, and the children. There's not a very high population where extended families live in the same household. Respect is highly important. The father is the primarily financial provider of the family, but there is an increasing number of working mothers. And the mother is the primary authoritative figure for household decisions. So it is, as far as health decisions, it is a combined decision with the mother and the father.
Alright, there are many spiritual influences in the healthcare, and many of the people are going to the diviners or the herbalists for care. They've been discussed earlier in the presentation. They're also known as the Sangoma, is the diviner, and the Iyengar is the herbalist. The diviner makes diagnoses based on listening, observation, and experience, and they're aided by communication with their ancestors. So that's the supernatural or the spiritual aspect of that form of healthcare. And they also make decisions through what's known as the throwing of bones, which could be compared to casting dice in our culture or something like that. It's usually one is called to be a diviner. It's looked upon as a calling and by one's ancestors, and if the calling is ignored or disobeyed, the punishment is an illness or something, a devastating health crisis. The herbalist is more of the druggist. They're the one who dispense the medications which are made from their natural resources. Illness in this culture is looked upon in 4 different ways as the cause of it. The natural illness is something that's accidental or congenital. The animistic is any illness that's brought on by the influence of wind, clouds, earth, or water. And an example of this would be what we know as the common cold. Magical. A magical cause of illness is how they do insanity or even a headache. And one can also become ill because of a failure to respect and to pay homage to one's ancestors. And treatment for illness is based on restoring the harmony between a person and the cosmos, or just harmony within the body. The health decision makers, the decision maker has already been discussed briefly, but they do have a patriarchal society. So as a nurse, when you're taking care of a patient, you're going to want to find out who the patriarch of their family is, and be discussing treatments and options with both the patient and the patriarch of the family. Now we're going to discuss their view on pain. Studies have shown that African Americans in general are less likely to receive emergency medications and treatment for things like fractures of an extremity. They also needed less morphine to control their pain. And this could be due to their cultural perception of pain and how they're expected to deal with it. They tend to use more coping techniques instead of medications or something along those lines. And an example of a coping mechanism would be narrative. One article gave an example of a South African widow who was dealing with fibromyalgia, and due to their a stigma with related to being in pain, she found that that resources such as keeping a personal journal or being in a support group, she kind of lost her personal identity except for being a patient. So she was just able to identify as being part of the group who was in pain instead of her specifically being in pain.
Okay. Now, dealing with the attitude toward medication with the South African culture, as you can see, it's a lot different from what we have here in the United States. This here is basically a definition of the traditional healer in that South African culture. You can see it's a lot different. They use a lot of the natural substances such as animal and vegetable and substances such as those. What you can see is they're very different. We know they don't use a lot of the pharmacy drugs that we use. You don't hear of ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, or anything such in this culture. There's two different types of healers, as you can see, which was just spoken of. You have the diviner, which is just listening, observation, and experience to help make their diagnosis. This type of healer, they are called to do this, and if they're called to this, you don't hear them speaking of not doing it. They have a belief that if they're called to do it and they don't follow that, they'll get an illness. We have the herbalist, which is actually the druggist, kind of like a doctor here that gives drugs, but the difference with the herbalist is they use a lot of the natural substances to make their diagnosis and to heal, such as they have a lot of meaning with their drugs. White medicines are used to help with sorcery, and red medicines are used to help cleanse blood. What are the differences there? Let's see. Current statistics with healthcare in the South African culture, kind of moving towards this. As you can see, a lot of the deaths are a lot of female, kind of similar with the male, so 3,000 death difference. Here are some of the major causes and abnormal findings they see. The biggest one, as you can see, were ill-defined and unknown causes. A lot of this is because of their differences in healthcare in the South African culture, especially compared to the United States. If you move over to the next slide, you'll see the lowest number of deaths occur in the 5 to 9 to 10 to 14 years of age. And then go into the highest number of deaths being 30 to 34, then 35 to the 39 years of age. And the largest cause of death is going to be caused by certain infectious and parasitic diseases. From there, you really have to ask yourself, is that due to the fact that they don't have the medications to really help treat these diseases as we have in our culture, where we have medicines like antibiotics. They don't use antibiotics in this population. Differences by sex show that differences in males have a higher proportion of deaths due to non-natural causes such as assault and complications of medical care.
For the culturally linguistically appropriate services, for this country, we found that literacy isn't as big of an issue as resource, because so many of them are bilingual or multilingual that it's really the resource of healthcare that it is the communication, because they all know a lot of English anyways. But those were a couple things that we've narrowed down. One important was recruit, promote, and support culturally and linguistically diverse governments, leadership, and workforce that are responsive to the population in the service area. So not only are they getting people on board, but it's important to get the leadership on board too. And those are the couple other ones that we picked. For this country, community is going to be a big deal as they all work together to make sure the resources are available for all of the population. For the ADPI, for the community assessment, for African Americans, they have an automatic genetic risk factor for hypertension and heart disease. So for this country, we thought it would be the best plan was to send out teams to villages that don't have the health care available to reach. Like in the city areas, the health care is available. But when you go out of the cities to the villages, they don't have that access.
A way to implement this, obviously, is to assemble these teams of healthcare professionals, people who are able to go around from community or to village, and to do basic screenings such as the BMI screen, blood pressure screening, simple blood tests to show cholesterol and elevated lipids, and things along those lines, just to assess their basic health, and also to acquire the supplies, whether it be through a charitable organization who would be willing to fund these teams going to these villages. And a way to evaluate this is to collect the data, pick the villages that are most at risk and who are most in need of resources, and to plan follow-up visits based upon those results, and also looking at the results, providing care when necessary. Also taking into account the culture, educating the traditional healers and saying what is actually causing this illness, while also being respectful to their cultural beliefs.
Okay, so let's get back. Alright, integrating a Christian worldview into the South African culture. We automatically have to understand these guys are they're going to have much different beliefs from what we have, especially from a Christian worldview. In Acts 17:26, and he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all faces of the earth. This is God specifically saying how everyone's going to be different. There's many different cultures, very diverse. If coming from a biblical Christian point of view, this is a person with a Christian worldview believes that their primary reason for living is to love and to serve God. There's 4 different approaches you can take here to kind of help with your integration of Christian worldview into a different culture. You have the attitudinal approach, which is basically developing an attitude as a Christian to want to develop that attitude and to help understanding that they're going to be very different with what their beliefs are. You have the ethical approaches, which is going to be developing an approach to where you're going to have different ethical reasons, such as abortion and euthanasia in different societies. You're going to have to take biblical reasoning to help with that. You have entitled foundational approaches, which is basically where you're wrestling with the different beliefs of other people. Some, like the South African culture, they're going to have different beliefs. You're going to have to wrestle with kind of helping them believe what you believe, and just at least looking at the different perspectives of what they're going to have. And then the last is the worldview approach, taking in, believing that God is everything. He is what the worldview is from a Christian point of view. God is the center of all things, and to kind of take in the different perspectives from different cultures and relating that into each. And here are our references. This kind of sums up our presentation for today, and hopefully we have a good understanding of it all.